As it is Mental Health Awareness Month, we continue the conversation today by looking at what our kids are actually learning in schools and if perhaps the doom and gloom in the classroom could be contributing to the stress and worry that so many kids are facing and feeling. The teen years, as we know, are already tough enough simply for the biological and physiological changes that are happening. And then when kids are saturated with information that really overall carries a negative tone, in conjunction with emotional deep dives and therapy light in schools, thanks to SEL's push to make everything about your feelings, well, it's suddenly not so surprising that we see the crisis in mental health that we do in kids today.
But what I found when I left the classroom was, most of we just assume that what kids do all day is all the same, right? That all we need to do is measure what goes in and measure what comes out, and there was just not an appreciation for the very different experiences students could have based on curriculum.
Why wouldn't they be learning it? But when you look into like some of your writings have looked at examples of a day in the life of a student and these subjects including things like a novel about self-harm and worse about and then journaling about how trauma shapes identity, which just seems like the most bizarre concept of ever to have a kid write about. And then of course we've seen such a focus on racism overall and overall in the country as well. So they have this is kind of something that's saturated in society anyway, in the news and on social media. So then when kids are also getting it drilled into them in school, it just seems like so much. So
Yeah.
what do these examples reveal about the overall tone that students are just immersed in overall?
But I mean, I guess the best overall summary I can give, and I don't want to overstate the case, 'cause I can't point to data on this and say that this is universal, but it's not hard to spot it. There's this idea that it's somehow less than authentic, as a teacher, if you are not grounding your lessons every day in the problems of the world. In other words, hey kids, there's all these issues out there. There's climate change, democracy's hanging by a thread. Pick your cause, etc. We need to get kids engaged on these topics. Well, no, you don't necessarily need to do that, especially not very, very young children. But I do think, Missy, that there's this idea that we're not being serious or professional unless we are presenting a warts and all view of the world to children. And I'm not sure we're doing kids any favors by presenting this kind of unremittingly bleak view of the world.
Yeah, I agree. But okay, so I'll move us back to the idea of mental health and the doom and gloom in the classroom. But do you feel like so with what you have seen in talking about the curriculum again, do you think that that environment is when kids are immersed in it all day long is possibly contributing to some of these negative outcomes that we're seeing?
But as a teacher and a parent, you tend to think, how could it not? In other words, if all your child is viewing is doom and gloom all day, then at some point that must be, that pushes them into despair, or at least runs the risk of it.
That's really unfair on the teachers. It's unfair on the students. It's just not, I think that's a really great point and something that hopefully people all across all the aisles could get behind, frankly. But all of those pieces are just so important for parents to understand. And that's encouraging too, because those are real practical steps that things that parents can do if they're concerned about what's happening in schools, in the curriculum, what's being taught or not taught, what things are being focused on. Do you have any other takeaways or suggestions, other practical tips that if parents are feeling overwhelmed, going back to the beginning of the conversation where the topics and being taught might be negative, maybe the teachers are unfortunately taking this concept of trying to implement agents of change or create agents of change, and that alone is a heavy and not really what they should be doing, because then they don't have time to be teaching the basics that need to be getting taught anyway. And to reiterate, we certainly, neither of us are saying that kids should never learn about the hard parts of life: war, poverty, injustice, the coming AI dystopia or utopia that may or may not be down the pipe. These are all real things that need to be addressed, and kids do need to learn about it when it's appropriate. And we don't have to dwell on the hard times, and should frankly see very much see the hope in our ability to overcome.